Maybe I have questioned what is in front of my eyes my whole life. Not so ideal for my parents and those attempting to direct me into a reasonable, content existence, but what can I say? I have just the right amount of strengths and self-management skills to sneak under the radar, and just enough campaigner and rebel to cause a ruckus. What I have never questioned is what I see without my eyes. A deeper understanding of the wisdom and flow of life that is happening beyond the rat race. A depth without borders, a depth outside of the box. I am here in these words projecting out of your speakers to shine a light on a different idea. To spread seeds of possibility, to offer balance and disruption. To adjust the camera towards the kinks and shadows of ourselves, and to appreciate every nook and crevice of our existence. I am offering this podcast as a collaborative experiment with life, a journey of freedom making and change shaking, a new way that starts within you. Well, hello everyone. It's been a while and I wanted to share. Well, actually, I don't really want to share, but it seems very relevant that I had a rather crammed full end of summer, and I wasn't able to get to launching a next episode for this podcast series. And so I wanted to share about that. You know, when something else takes over and gets in the way of inspiration, be it responsibilities or great tumultuous turns of events, or the rug being pulled out from under us, or even other slightly delightful things. Sometimes it can be hard to get back on the path once you have been sideswiped. I was working on a few episodes and experiments that were not really going anywhere, sometimes because too much of a time spanned the sections of working on them, so the luster was just sort of lost. And others simply weren't sparking my imagination in the first place. And if I've learned one thing, it's that I need to follow my heart. One interview that I lined up a while back was with my instincts coach and mentor, Elinor, who I have worked with for probably like 8 years or so in the realm of personal effectiveness and understanding myself and how I operate. Ironically, so many things waylaid this interview at first. My stretch of so many other projects for one. Challenging transitions and days that required us to keep rescheduling. And other times where we got together but simply got swept into other important work on the self. But oh man, am I so glad we finally were able to have this conversation. I was immediately transformed back into inspiration and excitement for why I spend much of my time working on this podcast. And despite the fact that I don't know what was happening with the weird sound in the beginning of this episode, I hope that you enjoy it as much as I did. You, Elinor, have helped me. You've helped support me in discovering and uncovering so much of who I am and how I function in this world and every little thing about me. And you know so much of it. You know some of the really internal stuff. I want to ask you, who are you?
Oh, you do like to throw out tough questions to start with, eh? Well, interestingly enough, Colette, you know, in the same process that we've worked with, you know, in our journey together, in this uncovering, it has been similar in a way for me, because in this instincts work, I've learned about myself and who I am and what's important to me, my values, and been able to stand in those and support those. And I think in that process, in sharing with others and learning about them, again, I've learned more and more about myself. And the journey that each of us is making in life. I had a moment of recognition many years ago when I saw myself as a human potentialist. I was literally standing in a bank lineup and somebody said something about, who are you or something like that, right? And this just popped out of me, human potentialist. And I went, wow, of course, that's always what I've been doing. I've been trying to uncover people's potential and bring that out. So at the same time, it means I'm doing the same with myself without ever realizing it. And I've always been that people person. And this instincts tool has been so supportive in fostering that potential for the people I work with and honestly for myself. So I'm really grateful for that.
Cool.
Is
Human
that
potential.
sufficient? Does it help you? Or did you want to know more about,
No.
the nitty gritty?
Well, we're going to go there because whatever, a series of the nitty gritty brought you to the bank lineup to the human potentialist moment. And so going back into some of that, I seem to be less interested in like, oh, this is where I grew up and this is what I did and this is what I don't know, the kind of rat race stuff of
I just
life.
call that background information,
Yes, background
but
information.
it's what brought us to, kind of who we are
Mhm.
today, but it
Mhm.
is our interpretation of those experiences,
Right.
perceptions, our attitudes that came out of them
Mhm.
that make us that kind of unique individual.
So on that note,
Yes, ma'am.
tell me a couple of key moments of your life. Maybe
Whoa. Oh, Colette, you're so.
curiosities, challenges, changes, transformations.
I think an important key moment in my life was the recognition of being a teacher, because I'm going to assume the potential was seen in me when I was in university, and I was being encouraged to take education training courses, and I kept repeatedly for all 4 years to say, no, I'm not going to become a teacher. And then I went traveling. When I came back, I needed a job, and they were hiring teachers. Without the education, because I had a home economics degree and they needed home ec teachers. So I was a shoe-in. Well, I went and applied to do some substitute teaching work. And honestly, really the first day that I was in a classroom, I just had a sense of belonging there. And shortly thereafter, I was interviewed for a temporary teaching position for half a year, and I went for the interview and I got accepted, and they gave me credentials, and so I did the rest of the filling in pieces in terms of getting the credentials I needed during summer school time. It's the experience I've often had in my life is what I call coming in through the side door. So in other words, I protested about becoming a teacher, but unbeknownst to me, that was my gift, that was my calling. And the rest of the pieces came into place without me pursuing it. I really do believe, Colette, that our calling pursues us, whether we're aware of it or not. And we're going to be led on that pathway, as long as we notice the clues, I suppose. and that recognition, it wasn't just, at first it was like teaching in a classroom, but I realized as a teacher that it was a theme throughout my life, and it's still happening. I'm teaching instincts, but it's more than that. And I love the interactions that I have with others, with people, with students, like yourself, for example. So other significant moments, well, being a mother, I knew when my first daughter was born that my life was changed forever. That's an obvious piece to say, but again, it was that same kind of feeling in a different way when I was in that teaching classroom and recognized that, and it was not even like an obvious recognition, but I belong here. And I knew that my life was changed forever. And I didn't know what the future would hold, but I was in awe of it, to be honest. I was in awe of it. And the funny thing is, again, it comes back to archetypes work that we've talked about before. I have the mother archetype, and people can have the mother archetype even if they don't have their own children. And I experienced that even in the classroom. I used sometimes by mistake students would say, "Mom," it's like, oh, Mrs. Meney, wrong person, right? But it's the nature of who you are, and that's how our archetypes fit in and find us as well. Yeah, I've just had a number of moments in my life, Colette. I think I've been blessed that way I call it like moments of recognition. When I met the person that I was going to marry, like, to me, it was a divine setup. And the more we can accept it, I suppose, then we can have, experience the joy with that as well. Because I think that's kind of what the divine pathway is trying to give us, is joy. And yet it's been one of those words, like the freedom word, which is, I learned from you, are words that I never really labeled in my life. When I met my husband, who was an Australian teaching in Haida, literally we met and planned to get married within 3 weeks, and were married within 2 months, and we're together for 31 years. So I always find it kind of interesting, when people get challenged by others, is like, what, you can't get married after knowing each other for 3 weeks. Like, I just think you have to throw some of these kind of rules and ideas out the window, and people have to trust in themselves and walk the path. Because it's been one of those unusual pieces, puzzles of my life, in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Something you said, it was, I noticed that this is an area that people struggle in, or whatever.
Yeah, when I was looking at relationships, marriage.
Right, relationship.
They do, there's a lot of thought processing that can go on. And I think, one of the things I often say to people is literally stop thinking, right? Because our minds can drive us crazy. And it's not an easy thing to do. But if you even just remind yourself, stop thinking and be present to what is going on and what is arising, and work with that. And of course, as you know, the instincts work helps us and supports us with that. But it's just important, because then the job is to check into your heart, check into yourself. And I don't even know if it's the heart, maybe it's the soul. It's just check into that part of you that actually does know. And even if it's kind of foreign, because I think when I was at the age of 24, when I, met the person who became my husband, I didn't know all this spiritual language. I didn't even consider that I was walking a spiritual path. It wasn't until 45 when I had the wake-up call. But at the same time, as I look back on my life, I was still trusting of what was unfolding in my life. And I said yes to it. But I don't really know why. That's how it was. And I did it.
It's perfect, because one of my questions was going to be, is there any area that you find that people are ineffectively functioning the most? And it might be thinking, because you've mentioned thinking,
Well, I don't think about it as thinking. I really look at the 4 basic areas of a person's life, because those are the areas that percolate, whether it is relationship, whether it's career, whether it's money, whether it's health. Because I think that, I'm going to use that expression, there's a knocking on one's door, so to speak. For some people it is in the relationship arena. For some people it is with career. Some people it is the financial journey, and for some it's the health journey, and for some it's all of it. What do I think is the one that I've noticed the most challenging for people? It's about relationships, because they cut across all of those things too. I mean, each one is interconnected, right? Like, I've never been someone to separate out what I call work and personal life, because who you are, you take with you wherever you are and whatever you go into. But I think we get caught up in the relationship world. It's comes back to ourself in terms of, there's who I think I am, who others think I am, and what I think others think I am. It gets very convoluted. And I found sort of my greatest challenges have been what I'm trying to think of what others think of me. And then when I actually, have a conversation with them, it's just not that at all. There's an incredible lot of misunderstanding that goes on in the world because we haven't been able to speak to each other and really find out what is going on, what is the challenge here, what is the problem. And then when you find out what that is, and sometimes it turns out not to be about you at all, which is a great revelation, then there's our word, freedom. Here's where the freedom comes in, doesn't it? Because I'm freed up from worrying about or thinking about how others see me, and vice versa,
So, what does freedom mean to you?
Well, I knew you'd have to ask me that question. And you're the one that's been teaching me about freedom, because freedom was never a question kind of in my life. And I don't know why. Because I know it's been extremely important to so many people and many people that I work with. But maybe I just never questioned it. And I've said to you before, when we say the word freedom, I always think of Chris Christopherson's song, Me and Bobby McGee. Freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose, and loving ain't worth nothing, but it's free. So there you go. Connect the dots between love and freedom and relationship, right? But I did give some thought about this freedom question, because I knew it was going to be on the agenda. But it's like, I've thought about it. For me, it ties back to spaciousness within ourselves. So in other words, we have more freedom to move because we're freer of our thoughts, coming back to that thinking piece. So hopefully we can make better choices for ourselves, or be willing to ask some of the difficult questions of people, find out what is really going on. And then you can make easier choices or better choices, which I think ultimately lead to freedom.
Beautiful.
Well, thank you. I'm more curious about your sense of freedom, but I've been learning about that. You know what I mean? As I say, everybody's been teaching me about this freedom and need for it. But I do remember, and what's important to me is the balance between kind of freedom and responsibility. Because I always used to get concerned, especially with I was teaching in school, that people became quite self-oriented, and I wanted to try and achieve that balance between one's own personal needs versus kind of the needs of society or needs of the world, and what is my responsibility, and the balance of that. And again, it is a balance, because if we go too far leaning over to being overly responsible, then it comes back to us, and we can become victims or martyrs, or it can be too much the other way of becoming very arrogant, self-centered, which again, we need that as well. So it comes back to balance. And it's not an easy path for people to walk, but we keep working on it.
Yes, we do. I do my best not to understand, not to try and figure out instincts, to be honest. And not that I even have to try my best to do that. It's just I trust it. I trust the process. I just work it. I just do it. And it takes care of me and itself, and that's really great. And at the same time, I have an understanding that some of the basis of what you teach with the instincts tool has to do with moving up the rungs of the ladder. Like, that's a part of its sort of structure. If you were to describe, and I've heard you talk about the moving up the rungs of the ladder, that's a part of my language now. I've heard it so much. If you were to describe this ladder in everyday life to, whoever's listening, how would you describe it?
Well, that is a good question, Colette. I've come up with lots of different ways to describe things just for the moment, whatever's going on for people. To me, the most important thing is is for people to have a personal context of instincts, because as you described it, it isn't really describable. It is experiential. I can talk about it through a logical perspective, which I will do now. But I did love what you said about it, because it actually speaks to and confirmed for me what my own journey of instincts has been about and what I've been trying to teach to people. So you just nailed it. And I don't think I've ever even shared it with you before.
Mm.
But I'm going to give you that 4-step process first before I go over to the basic instincts line. But the first piece of instincts for me has always been trust in the coach. Because if the person is not going to trust in the coach, then they're not going to continue anyway. And then the second step is trust in the tool, right? The third step is trust in your ability to use the tool, which is really what you were describing and going through that. And the fourth is find your place in the sun. And I didn't even really know it at the time when I came up with this. It just, I don't know, came to me a long time ago when I started first working with instincts, is what was I trying to do when I was teaching people this self-coaching process? And now this find your place in the sun connects into the nature of enthusiastic, which is the top rung on the ladder. So if I'm talking to somebody about what instincts is about, it's about 14 attitude patterns on a ladder. And it is a ladder because they are sequential steps. Our instincts intimately know them. That's why the tool works, because our instincts recognize these patterns. They are naturally going through these phases. And as I said, 14 steps on the ladder, because hopeful, which is the conception of the idea, the kind of engine, running the show here, that's trying to find what step, what instinctive pattern do I need for this current situation? It's not on the ladder yet, right? And then there are 14 steps going up the ladder to enthusiastic, where it's built in. And enthusiastic actually encompasses all the steps on the ladder. And as you're familiar with, that first step in the ladder is careful and taking care of things, yourself. It's putting the pieces in place one step at a time. So what I say to people is we have all these steps on the ladder working for us. The question is whether they're effective or ineffective. So sometimes when we're stuck in a situation or a disappointment or difficulty, what we have is a reoccurring pattern that is going on, and our instincts cannot reach any higher up the ladder than the next step. And so we keep ending up in cycles of patterns that we can recognize. I call it same horse, different color, where the pattern comes around again. So with this tool, we can assess where that pattern is stuck, and through a really simple process, shift or lift our instinctive attitude, our ability to access higher steps on the ladder, so that ultimately the pattern doesn't even come around again any longer. And we honestly just forget about it. It becomes instinctive. It becomes built in. And it's only in kind of looking back on, how we did things before versus, what's happening now, that we can really notice how we may have changed. And also we get feedback from other people on changes and things that they might notice. There's so many different ways of describing it ultimately,
For sure.
Mm.
As I was listening to you, I was thinking, like, how cool it is to get to see people lift, right? To go through substantial shifts in their life. Like, I get to see in my line of work profound things happen
Yes.
in people's wellness, right? And something as simple as I remember finally getting my mom to come and do yoga after so many years of her going, no, 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 yoga's not my thing. It's boring. It seems like
Yeah.
not something I would like.
Yeah.
And after a little while of her practicing regularly, she came flying into the studio one morning and went, "Look at what I can do." And she's standing there. I'm watching her going, and she's standing there and she lifts her, like she's standing on both legs. She lifts one leg up towards her chest and like slips her sock on or off, right?
Ah.
And I was looking at her going like, "What? What are you doing? What am I watching for?" And she was like, I haven't been able to do this for like 20 years, right? I have to sit and pull my leg up and.
Wow.
And so it was like something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm listening to you talk and I'm going like, you get to see that like in a whole another realm. Would you Could you describe like some of the most or any of the most revolutionary changes you've seen in people?
Yes, I can. The first thing I want to say before we go into that, though, is these instinctive patterns are running the show in our life, and people get natural instinctive shifts, right? Just like the experience you're describing with your mom. Like these things happen and occur naturally. It's just that we don't have any kind of control over when that happens. This instincts tool is profound in the sense that we now have possibility of creating that instinctive shift, that the process that we're using with the tool, we're identifying something that is a difficulty and able to actually move and change it. Yeah, I've witnessed so many profound changes for people, and I really have this trust in this tool and the process, and I've had that from very early on, because I can remember one comment someone said to me that stuck in my mind. They go, like, I come in and I'm like distraught and, in a challenging, difficult situation. And we go through this process. And over, a period of an hour and a half, like I am transformed. And then I go home. But the piece that really stuck for me was they go, you know that I'm going to be okay. In other words, they're referring to me, that I know this process works and that they're going to be okay. And as I've always, said to you, it's like, the rule of thumb and instincts is no news is good news. And I expect to hear from you if, things aren't going well. I mean, I just experienced one, recently where I was able to, this person had been distraught for quite a while. This is a like new person that just came to me, and we're just able to tap straight into what was the challenge and shift that. And they went away just in a much happier place and ready and able to deal with the current situation that they were challenged with.
Mm-hmm.
But very early on, one of the pieces that really stuck with me is I worked with a young man. This is when I was still living in Australia. And, we didn't do a lot of work together. You would know in the work we do today, we essentially completed one learning curve, but it was in those days all done with a number of sessions. And then I did a results review with this person some months later. And one of the questions is ultimately, what difference has this made for you? And what this person said, and it still will bring me to tears, I am no longer self-loathing. I am no longer self-loathing. And I knew I'd changed that person's life.
Mm-hmm. That's profound.
It's profound. Yeah. Those kinds of moments have enabled me to continue forward, because I'm working on something that, it's really in that invisible realm of change that's happening. And it is creating profound change for people. Thank you for asking.
Wow, I'm glad I did. It's interestingly applicable because this year has been challenging for so many on like a whole nother level than maybe our usual challenges.
Exactly.
Like, holy, life is tough sometimes.
Yeah.
And we have like a very chaotic narrative for 2020 going on
Yeah.
that adds this whole other piece.
Yeah.
And many people I know are trapped in sort of the hindrance of that, even if they don't realize, well, they lots of times don't realize where it's coming from or why. What would you say to those people if you could just sit down and chat with them like this?
A good piece. Definitely a challenging situation for everyone. I think it came onto us really quickly. I mean, beginning of March, we're still kind of doing things here as if everything's status quo and making plans for the end of the month. And boom, none of those plans came to pass. So I would be looking at, for every person, this is an inward journey, right? This chaos in the outer world is challenging for everyone. It's definitely a question of attitude, but it's also asking us to, go in ourselves and look at what is important to us, and to ultimately that, do the best we can with the spaces, resources that we have. And once again, it's like, I think it's two parts of trying to look at what you are grateful for. And the other part is what we can do for others. Because even in small ways, like what I notice when I go to the grocery store and I line up outside and everybody's got masks on, whoever would have, I would never have imagined in my life that I would be standing in a lineup with people wearing masks, right? And I didn't have a problem wearing a mask because I used to have hay fever challenges and I had to live in a mask for 2 weeks. It was so bad. But I didn't expect, and of course, you see the creativity that's come out from people in terms of the styles of masks and fabrics, and it's become a whole industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
The challenge is now is connecting to people, and we're just using our eyes now because we can't see a person's mouth any longer or even necessarily hear them and understand them. And it's really testing people's patience and our ability to connect with others, but even more so, we have a greater need to connect. So I think it's about finding ways to connect, whether it's with yourself or with others. But for each one, because you're saying, what would I say to them? I think it's kind of what I'm saying to myself, and the word that's coming to mind is patience. When we first started into this, I thought, oh, by the fall, I'm sure it'll be over. But as I noticed, in this 6 months onward journey, we've become more accustomed. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, accustomed to the wearing masks and social distancing and things like that, and making good choices and considerations, not just for ourselves, but for the people around us. I think it's being patient and trying to find what is good in it for you. I'd like to believe that it is changing the world. So I don't know what it's going to look like in a year or two. I would like to hope that the virus will disappear or evolve into something else, and in that process that the world will evolve, because I think it has to evolve into a more loving place. I think that's what this is all about.
Mm-hmm. I think you said you think it's a good thing that we have gotten accustomed to the protocols and the scenarios. And I imagine that you're not saying you're glad we have to wear masks and not hug each other anymore, but that you're actually glad that we've acclimatized or something.
I'm saying I'm glad we're climatized because we were spending too much energy in the beginning kind of protesting that and
Mm-hmm.
fighting against it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we can use our energies to better use rather than just fighting about masks. And that's why people have, it's been kind of fun to see the different colored masks and different things that are going on, so that we can be focusing more on how we can help each other out,
Mm-hmm.
how we can be supportive, how we can, offer that nurturing that people so need. So it's more that, I would like to see us use our energies in more positive, creative ways.
Which leads me to wanting to know what you think life is about. Just
Okay.
another easy Friday morning question.
Well, it's interesting because I just read something the other day which aligns with all of this, and it came by Carolyn Mace, who we both know, we're great students of hers. Our highest potential is to love, and that's what everybody wants. But yet, in a way, we're also fighting it. And at the same time, we have a difficulty discerning kind of what really is love. And I know in my journey with instincts, I've gone through the movement from kind of saying yes to everything to saying no, and to learning what really works effectively for me, to now being able to say yes and embrace life in a different way. And that's the challenge, isn't it? Because I think if our highest potential is love and we're not in that, then to me the opposite of that is victim. And I think one of our biggest challenges in life is to, I think first thing I say is owning our victim, because we all have a victim part of us, right? So we have to own it and empower it in its strengths. There is no easy answers for that. Everybody's got different ways. Like your mom learning yoga, that was empowering for her. So it's going to be different, I'd say different strokes for different folks, but how we become empowered is each person's kind of challenge in life. And what I do know, and the one thing I've learned for myself, is that we are supported in that empowerment. It never ceases to amaze me. And I even over last weekend, I was having some pretty dark moments, and I just keep walking through, right, in faith and hope.
Mm-hmm. What never ceases to amaze me is how loved and supported and understood and accepted that I always feel by you.
Thank
And
you.
even as we do this interview, even more, I'm just like, wow, you're just the best. We could just keep having, you want to come on the podcast all the time so we could just keep sharing your words of wisdom out into the world.
Thank you, Colette. I am blessed, but it's that's the nature of love. It's a two-way street, and we have to be able to reach out without expectation. And there are plenty of times when we're going to get knocked back and we're going to get hurt, because that's how life works. But it's a choice. It's not easy. But I think when a person says yes, when they say, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. I mean, this last session I was talking about with someone, they're the one that quoted that to me at that moment in time with the situation they were dealing with. And it just kind of blew me away, right? Because I'm just attempting to meet life, I guess, and embrace it.
Mm-hmm.
And this time that we're living in right now, which is pretty unique on the planet, I think is a kind of test for everyone. Thank you. I just feel blessed with the people I do have in my life, and grateful for that.
So, to share a closing thought, a closing question, and I know this one can't usually come from the logical mind. It really ties into this whole conversation, I think.
Mm.
But who do you need to be so that other people can be free?
Well, there's the obvious answer, but it's not so easy to get there. Who you need to be is yourself, because each of us has our own unique gifts and talents and potential in the world. And too often we're caught up in what we think we're supposed to be and attempting to fulfill someone else's wishes, often parents. And when a person's not in their true alignment, then they can't, share their gifts with the world in the same way. And they become shut down and looking for other kind of ways and means to either survive or to find their way in the world. And it's not easy. Life can throw us pretty serious curveballs, and we have to be, well, I shouldn't say we have to be, you don't have to be. That's the thing I learned a while ago, maybe 5 years ago. I always assumed that everybody wanted to fulfill their potential, or that they wanted to change, that that change was a good thing because it's happening anyways, whether we like it or not. But what I discovered is that it's not true. Not everyone does. And so my biggest lesson was being accepting of that. But it's a challenge for me. I just caught it because, the question you're answering or asking me is about who we need to be. We need to be ourselves. And then, you open a whole can of worms on, who am I, right? But I only had 3 questions in life, which I didn't recognize until my mid-40s or whatever, but it is, who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going?
Well, thank you for being who you are.
Well, thank you for being who you are, contributing to the world. What we're talking about, Colette, it's not an easy path. What I often say, it is not for the faint of heart, and don't, kind of criticize yourself if you don't feel like you're doing what you can do. What I've learned is it's the small things that matter. It's the small things that matter. That smile or that hello to that person in the grocery line, or helping somebody with something in a simple way, is what makes a difference. It contributes to the greater good of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.